Hey everyone, it's Peter Kerr from Rock Daydream Nation. And today I've got a special guest that you may be familiar from the Contrarians. I've got Marco Dioria, and we're going to talk about a little documentary about a band called Mystique, Standing on the Firing Line. So this documentary came out in 2022, and the DVD came out probably a year or so ago. And I wanted to get Marco onto the show and talk about the background to the documentary and where things are now and take it from there. So, Marco, welcome to the show. Are you surprised at the success of this movie and how things all turned out?
I'm surprised and not surprised. I'm surprised that when I look back at everything that happened, I'm surprised wow, I can't believe it happened. I can't believe, we had a premiere, we did in the theater, we got into film festivals, we won awards, we put it out on DVD. At the same time, it was everything that I envisioned, and maybe that's why it happened. When I was even before even any kind of filming, I kind of envisioned something similar to this, and this is what I expressed to the guys in the band. Like, yeah, let's put it in a theater, let's try to get it in film festivals, and then for our metal collectors out there, we can put it on a physical form because a lot of Mystique stuff had become collectible, like their old vinyls and cassettes and stuff like this. So it's funny because looking back, it's like how did all this even happen when I think about it? At the same time, it's like it's almost everything I envisioned.
Yeah, absolutely. So just to tell the folks at home, this is the classic story of a band, maybe a provincial band, came from Hamilton in Canada. It's a sort of an aspirational story where you had this ultra talented band. Some of them, you could call them as virtuosos, could have been a contender on the cusp of breaking it into the big time. Part of their story, they went to France, that close to getting signed to Electra Records, but didn't quite make it. So it's got that classic sort of story arc of missed it by that much. And we go over the journey, the recording journey and the musical journey of this band. And in a way, Marco, it's almost like the evolution of hard rock and heavy metal during the 80s. Wouldn't that be fair to say?
It is funny that it turned out that way, but I think a lot of bands probably went through that kind of curve or that learning curve over the 80s with some bands maybe kind of frilling their hair up a little bit or wearing a little bit of makeup to kind of fit in to find that commercial success that they were looking for. But Mystique's roots were kind of very rooted into that 70s sound, that kind of progressive, heavier, Deep Purple-ish, Judas Priest-ish type sound from the 70s. But by the end of the day, if you look at pictures of them at the end of the 80s, they could have fit in with those, with Poison and those types of
Mm,
bands, which is actually even alluded to in the movie, which is awesome. But yeah, I
absolutely.
would say so for sure.
One thing I've got to tell the folks here is there is a family connection, and Marco's uncle is the lead singer of the band, Raymond. In a way, is this kind of like a love letter to Raymond, a little bit of a family postcard? I guess my next question is, were you aware intimately when you were younger of Raymond's achievements in this band and how Mystique were going up the tree?
I think not as much a love letter to my family because I tried not to be too biased in terms of, I mean, I'm biased because I'm a Mystique fan, but if you watch the film, I tried not to be too biased in that it's not just all about Ray. Like Ray's not the center point. It's not all you know what I mean? It's not focused around him. I really tried to get down to it. I think for me, it was this because of that connection, which has been brought up a lot of times in interviews. I'm obviously that's how I know the band, but because it was because of that connection that I discovered the band, and I just formed this kind of fascination with, what was this? Because, I've said this in other interviews. Like I remember finding the Black Rider EP at my grandmother's house, when I was a small kid, and looking at the back and seeing Ray in the middle, and then also looking at other albums like Scorpions Worldwide Live and going, oh, Ray was in a band like Scorpions and the Mystique existed at the same time. Ray must have played to audiences on that centerfold picture when you open up Worldwide Live and you see just a sea of heads. I thought
Mm,
that's what Mystique was. I thought it was the same thing, and I became kind of fascinated with it. And over the years, I would ask him questions about it, and I actually enjoyed the music. I became a fan of those kind of bands that inspired Mystique, and also the bands that Mystique were competitive with around that time. And that's part of the reason why I pursued making the film as well. I'm also a fan of films and things like this, but I had this kind of fascination with trying to unravel like what was this? And I would ask him questions. And I started listening to the music, and he was always open to like, answering questions, and you know what I mean? Maybe some of it he was humoring me, or maybe some of it he was because I think he really had moved on from it at that point, because I had kind of discovered them in the late 90s, and that was a
Right.
good 10 years removed. So
Yeah.
it's not like he came to the family and was trying to hand out records to everybody, being like, remember me? I was in this band. Like, that's not what happened at all. It was kind
Yeah.
of me going to him and being like, what the heck is this about? And him kind of answering questions. And then me going online when the internet kind of was around in the 90s and trying to find stuff and piece it together myself. It became a lifelong passion of piecing together the clues and trying to figure out what was this. Because to me at the time, sorry, I'll end this, cut this real short, but like looking at a vinyl for one thing, when I was in the 90s, like it was all CDs. So one thing was like vinyl. Another thing was like this was this band that I was trying to like get to the core of, like what is this? And when I listened to it, I'm like, hey, this is actually really cool. So that was kind of part of it. So it wasn't necessarily a love letter to him, but at the same time, I can't deny that had I not been related to him, I would have never even discovered the band in the first place.
And that's the connection. And that's why I'm saying a love letter, because if it was anybody else, well, you know, that wouldn't have been the 6 degrees of separation that led you to doing the documentary. It's the family connection. But like when you were having gatherings, like at Christmas, were you, like when you were really young, did you have an awareness that, oh, my Uncle Ray's a rock singer in a band? Or that was sort of not really put
Yeah,
out there?
I did. Well,
Yeah.
he had the long hair and everything, and when I kind of started forming into like a real person, in the mid '90s, he was just getting out of singing in bands, but he still had the long hair, and like he's
Yeah.
still like if he gave me a ride and picked me up and brought me to McDonald's or something, he was blasting Whitesnake in his car, and you know what I mean, like he's and singing along with it, and like and I was aware that he was in bands and he was in other bands as well, and like there were like there was an 8 by he kind of after he'd moved out of my grandparents' house, my grandparents kind of left us. There was this little room kind of in the basement that was still kind of a lot of his stuff was in there. It was kind of like an office. So there was like an 8 by 10 of a band that he was in, and some cassettes laying around and vinyls that he stuff that he had
Mm,
recorded. So I knew that he was in a band.
yeah.
But it was just there was something about it that was kind of throwing me off. That was because at the time I didn't realize that there were levels to being a musician or a professional musician.
Absolutely. And isn't it wonderful that our peers and our family do inspire us? Because, it's like my older brothers and sisters inspired my music sort of tastes. And obviously with your uncle, that planted the seed for your love for hard rock and heavy metal. So there you have it. Um, Marco, were there any other rock documentaries that inspired you, that sort of planted the seed that, ooh, there's something I could do with this particular band? This might be a good story.
In particular, not exactly. I can't say that the Anvil documentary didn't have some type of influence on me, although to this day I've never actually seen it. But I am aware of it, and I know of how popular it is, and it might be silly. Some people might be rolling their eyes like, "Oh, has he never seen that movie?" Right? Because it in a lot of
Yeah.
ways it kind of there's similarities between the two stories. But I kind of feel like whether that movie existed or not, I would have kind of pursued something with this because I was always passionate about film and I always had this fascination with the band. I did watch a film before I filmed this called Searching for Sugar Man, which is a similar type of story where there was an artist from, I think, South Africa who had kind of put out an album and then disappeared. And or no, I
Mm,
think he was from somewhere else, but the album became popular in South Africa, I think.
yes, yes. Yeah, Rodriguez.
And
Rodriguez. Yes.
right. So I had watched that documentary and I was like, "Oh, this is really cool." And I think that kind of influenced some of my document, maybe more than Anvil. But in a weird way, I was very fascinated with long form interviews in the early
Mm,
internet day, early days of YouTube. I would watch these long form interviews. There was this series, I think it was like the Emmy TV interviews or something, and they would interview like Roger Ebert for like 2.5 hours, and he would just talk about everything. They would start at the beginning. They would ask him all these questions about how he got into film criticism, and it was not cut up at all. It was just a long form, him sitting in front of a camera and just answering questions. Those types of interviews taught me how to interview somebody and get a story from point A to point B. And I did that with all the musicians and in the band who I interviewed for the documentary and all the other people. I started with and so every interview that I had filmed, was a long form interview that eventually became cut up. But that's what influenced me the most, were those types of interviews. There was a lot of what's called shoot interviews in the wrestling world. So I was a kid and I was interested in wrestling. And in the early 2000s, the early YouTube days, these interviews would pop up where it'd be like, name a wrestler, would sit down for 2.5 hours and literally just talk about everything in one uncut up, in not even photos. It was just an unedited long form interview. And that taught me how to ask questions and figure out where to go.
Yeah,
So that influenced me the most. And then being a fan of bands like Kiss and watching documentaries on Kiss and AC/DC, Led Zeppelin, all that stuff.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Was everybody initially on board to participate in the project, or were there some holdouts? Were there a few folk who just couldn't get in front of the camera? They just didn't want to have anything to do with this?
Yeah, I think initially, so where this actually kind of germ of an idea came from was Mystique had put out the 30th anniversary of their Black Rider EP. So it became Eat Metal Records. This record company from Greece had approached them. I think they wrote a contract and maybe gave them some money and like a box of CDs and vinyls and stuff that they could do whatever they wanted with. And they extended it to 10 tracks. It was the original EP plus tracks from the I Am the King demo cassette and the final 45 that they had recorded, the single. And at the time, Ray was talking to John. They hadn't talked for several years, and they got this thing together. And Les, who was the second bassist in Mystique, for the around the time of the I Am the King recording, had actually kind of like reconnected them. I think he ran into Ray and was still friends with John. So that's how that CD vinyl thing that came out in like 2015. So 30th anniversary came out, and they were having conversations about maybe playing or maybe doing a concert of some type or getting some of the guys together. And one of the things at the time, I was going back to school for media. And Ray had said, hey, like if there's any kind of opportunity for you to maybe film a show or something, there might be some kind of opportunity there. And that's kind of where it started. Unfortunately, they never really reformed the band and played a show, but they that kind of, I think, maybe put the germ in my head because we started filming, I think in 2017 was when I really kicked things up and started filming with pre-production and started filming in 2018 was the first interview with Martin Popoff. Getting to your other question, though, were there holdouts? Yeah, there was a couple of folks who either did not get back to me or told me they would do an interview, but then ghosted me and just flat out told me they couldn't do it. So I had people not get back to me, people tell me they were going to do it and not do it, and then people just said no.
Yeah,
so, yes.
I guess my question is sort of mined in the area that sometimes history brings up old wounds. And were there any folk that it's just too raw and I don't want to have anything to do with it? It brings out bad memories, that sort of thing.
Yeah, the funny thing is, I think the biggest wound was between Ray and John, personally. And then I think maybe there was other wounds for other members, but I think like, Vic and Ian, who were both in the film, I think also had good reason to have wounds, or as you say, for the band, like Vic had kind of left and wasn't very happy. Ian was right in the middle of recording that new album, and when Ray ended up deciding to leave the band and was kind of left with some financial responsibilities that I don't think he quite appreciated with not having the product at the end of it. So I think it's funny that I feel like the people that were wounded the most, at least from my perspective, ended up being in the film. Maybe it was kind of therapeutic for them. But some of the other guys who I didn't think had a reason really to be that, but also I wasn't around at the time, but that's just my own personal perspective.
In the film, you take a narrative decision just to focus more on the work, how they created music. And there's not a lot about the sex and the drugs and maybe interpersonal type of incidents that you might sort of see in a rock and roll documentary. Was this a conscious decision to not go behind the music sort of route and just focus on the music and not do the kind of the salacious route that...
Yeah, and I think you get more of that in the DVD. I think the DVD really is, I think it's over 2 hours. It's like 2 hours and 20 minutes. And what we put in the film festivals was an hour and a half. So a lot of that detail about recording, the tape they used, that, I got them commenting on like every song on every album and
Mm.
the rehearsals and all this stuff. A lot of that was kind of removed, and the 90-minute version is more like the story of the band. But no, I wasn't interested in that stuff, and that was one of the things that I told all the guys who participated. I did about 12 interviews, and five people I interviewed played and recorded with Mystique. And I told him like it wasn't about that. It was more about the story of the band. It was more of a celebration. It wasn't meant to be the Dirt. Because I mean, like if you had watched or read the book The Dirt, I mean, they kind of already did that to perfection. So there was no way I would top something like that. You know what I mean? So my focus really was on uncovering who this band was.
The
Where
music
really
side, the more of
the
the
music
music.
side too.
Yeah.
I was really interested in that too, even just as a fan of music. Like I couldn't have told
Oh,
you anything about recording
yeah.
processes and writing process, composition and music and all that. You know what
Mm,
I mean? Like all that stuff until I made this documentary. I learned a lot about it. And that
yeah.
was more, it was more of a conscious decision for sure.
But were you tempted to possibly include partners? Because they would have had girlfriends or partners or other folk that were close to them. And in that periphery, in that circle, were you sort of tempted to include them into the story? Because I'm sure there would have been some events that would have affected the narrative and may have changed the narrative of your documentary.
You know what? That's a really good point. I did try to track down somebody who was a girlfriend of one of the band members. I won't name names or anything like this because they also were had been to a lot of shows and taken photographs and kind of was in that realm and ended up actually writing reviews for another Toronto music magazine. So they were kind of in the world. And I was really interested in interviewing them, but I couldn't track them down. In terms of like the other wives and girlfriends and stuff, I didn't quite go down that road. I was focused more on who was actually involved in the band. But now that you mention it, it would have been interesting to maybe ask some people, maybe a family member of somebody. I mean, like we had the family members of Ted who had produced the first EP and kind of managed the band a bit, but that was more because Ted's not around anymore. But no, that's a good point. I didn't quite consider it that way. I was more really focused on who was involved in the band.
The music is number one, and that's something that comes out loud and clear, folks. They come across as very studious, very wanting to make it. A lot of them are virtuoso players. They're in the studio, very professional. But was there any time that extracurriculum indulgence affect the band and the interrelations between the band?
Yeah, and the funny thing is, no, actually, when like I interviewed the engineer for Black Rider, and I interviewed the engineer for the final 45 that they recorded, and the final album that never got finished, that now has since been released on EP. Like a chunk of those songs has been re-released by Ace Records on vinyl. The funny thing is, both of them had who did not work together. One worked in the early part of the bands and one worked in the later part of the band. Both of them had the same opinion of the professionalism of the members of the band. Like they were both blown away by how these guys came in. They knew their parts. They knew what they were doing. They were professional. They showed up on time. Like I've heard stories of guys coming, bands going into record an album and they were just hammered and having fun and treating it like it was a joke or treating it like whatever it was. But that was never Mystique's identity or their reputation for sure. Both of those engineers talked about how Mystique had working with Mystique built up their skills and the way that they approached working with bands in the future. And one of them ended up working with the Disc Doctors, I think, and has been a part of like recording with some successful artists and stuff like this, and like lives in a mansion now, and you know what I mean? So that's Roman Clune there, and he was to this day, I think he has a Mystique album on his wall because it was like one of the first big bands that he had worked with that really cut his teeth learning how to engineer with Mystique, and like I said, just talked about how professional they were. But they, like anybody else, they like to party and have a good time too.
Yeah, absolutely. Was there any revelations that surprised you? Maybe surprised that some emotions are still hurled to this day.
Well, the funny thing is almost everybody I interviewed was right on the same track. Guys that had not talked or seen each other in talking decades had the same recollections of the events, and it was very easy for me to piece everything together because nobody said anything that was like, "What? Like what band was that guy in? That's not what happened. It all flowed together so naturally, and like there was a lot of things. I think I remember watching a lot of the early edits with Ray where I think he was kind of, and I did it the most with Ray. We also did it with John. Like we watched early cuts with John along the way because they were the two main members, and they're the owners of the band Mystique to this day, Mystique Productions. There was a lot of times where Ray was kind of just taken aback at all the recollections that he was having and things that he had forgotten. And I think for him, it was like this process of like something he never expected this to happen this way. And seeing all these interviews with these guys that he hadn't seen or talked to in like 30 years, I think brought up not so much emotions, not like he was sitting there crying, but I think he was really, it definitely had an impact on him. And he expressed that to me more than once, where he said, like, you don't know what you're like, you don't know what this means to me, like what this is and what this means to me. Revelations in terms of anything that was revealed to me, where it was, you know, that final album, which early on I never expected to dig up those songs. That was a big revelation. Because it was talked about in the early interviews that I did with like John and Ray and Lee Kazero, who was he was kind of a spiritual guide for the band because he had been through it in the 70s. He deserves his own documentary. I interviewed him for like almost 3 hours, and he was in a bunch of bands in the 70s, where it was even harder to record. And he kind of owned this music shop and this rehearsal studio, and he would record demos even and stuff like this. And he had a soundboard and everything. And guys would rent equipment from him, blah blah blah. He was really impressed with the band and kind of was their spiritual guide, kind of. And they all talked about this album that had never come out that they were recording at the end. And it was through connecting with more people around the band that I finally connected with, like Ian, who had told me, yeah, I've heard the songs, and Carl's got them. Then I connected with Carl, who was in Mystique right at the end, recording those songs with them and getting those songs and listening to them with Ray for the first time in 30 years because Ray and John didn't have the songs anymore. They both, I think John had sold the recordings after they had broken up. And the guitarist at the time, took the tracks, and he was like a janitor at a studio in Toronto, and brought the tracks in and did a mix down because he was in some bands but never recorded anything or even reached the level that Mystique did locally or anything like this. So in his mind, it was like, this is the only thing I have from this, experience. So he did a quick mix down of these songs. That was probably the biggest thing that was revealed, was getting those songs from those final recordings. And Ray and John had not even heard them for like 30 years. So that was really cool. And you'll see some of it in the film, that
Yeah,
process.
yeah, absolutely. So, folks, if you're not aware, Marco runs this YouTube channel called the Contrarians, and that's where I met him. And we do lots of different topics about rock and heavy metal and music per se. And one of the more popular topics, Marco, that always seems to get views, and even on my channel, is bands that should have been bigger. It's a very popular topic, and this sort of dives into this whole ethos of this documentary. It's a band that should have been bigger. Why do you think viewers like to watch these type of shows, invest time in watching this movie?
I think even for me, there's a lot of, if I'm a fan of music and I'm really interested in discovering new music. And I've, over the years been a fan of listening like to if I like a band, I'll try to find out who influenced them and listen to them and then find out who influenced them and listen to them. It makes music a much bigger and broader experience. And that's the way I've kind of tackled music. And I'm always kind of like just trying to discover new bands. Like, yeah, there's a lot of legacy bands that like, have been around a long time, but how many times I've listened to a lot of legacy bands' music for a long time, and I want to find stuff that I haven't heard. And going through the history of music and finding stuff that, I've heard a lot of bands, not even necessarily talking about Mystique, that are musically just as talented and as good as some of the bands that exploded and became very mainstream, but did not become mainstream. And I think it's just a becoming a fan of music and finding bands and trying to I'm always trying to tell people, you got to listen to these guys. I know you've never heard of them, but listen to these songs, because I think you're going to like it. And B, also just having something that you kind of know of that other people don't, kind of I think that's a piece of that as well. Like, oh, I know this really cool gem of a band here, and like nobody knows about them. They're kind of belong to me, this band, you know? So I think there's a couple aspects of it, and aspects I'm not even touching on.
This band goes to France, they record, they get an option with Electra Records, which is a big deal to do a demo. Do you have a personal theory of why Electra didn't choose to take up the option? Because all the cards were in place.
Yeah, so that deal was through Eric, I believe. Eric, who was this amazing guitarist from France, I don't know why he was coming to Canada. He had some connection to Canada, and he was trying to find a band and or a singer to work with. And he had management in France, I believe, that kind of got this deal together that he could, get a band together and produce some kind of demo or something like this. And he tried it with another band from Canada, but it quickly fell apart. The vocalist and whatever, it didn't work out for whatever reason. And then he discovered Mystique at one of their final shows with the original lineup, and yeah, approached Ray and John, and they Eric or Eric's management kind of got the ball rolling on this deal with Electra to produce this demo, and they agreed to fly out Ray and John to France. And Ray and John went out there, I think, for 6 or 8 weeks or something like this. They were living out there. They paid for the flight and I believe a place to stay, but they didn't pay for food and stuff. Ray and John had to take care of themselves while they were there, and
That's
or
a
Eric
funny
had
part
to
of
take
the yeah. That's a funny part of the movie where the gentlemen say they couldn't survive on they couldn't survive on the food. They didn't like the food over there.
yeah.
Cheese and wine, folks. Cheese and wine.
Yeah.
That's not a bad bad way to survive.
So
Oh,
they had this deal with Electra, and Electra actually owned the rights to what became I Am the King. I actually have the re-release of I Am the King here on cassette. Oh, my background's blurry. But let me just unblur this real quick. So this is the re-release.
yeah.
This is not the original, but this was Electra still had the rights to this music. When they came back from Canada, John had to fight to get the tape, and he brought it back to Canada, and they released it in Canada, but Electra still had the rights in France. Why they chose not to pursue it further, I don't know. Maybe it
It's
was I don't know, a
it's a
monetary thing. I know that there's a lot of politics. I'm not gonna go into it too much, but I have heard not even just from the guys in the band, but some of the guys that were around the band, like Lee talked about it a lot too. Just the politics around, if a record company is trying to push a local band, they might kind of put the thumb on other bands to kind of keep them out of the way. So they might talk to some other bands as if they're going to sign them. And oh yeah, go back and give us more songs, give us more songs. Meanwhile, they're, trying to tie that band up so they could push this other band. So I heard of politics like that as well. I don't know if that was the Electra deal, if that was the thing with Electra, but I did hear some rumblings about just politics, like music politics and things like this, like, trying to keep Mystique under our thumb over here so we can really push this other band over here so they don't get signed with another label or something. Maybe some stuff like that had happened too. I'm not sure.
Yeah, look, it's a common thing for Australian bands that the head office or the corporates in New York. And why would they push an Australian band that's miles, 1,000 miles away, where it's cheaper and more economical to push bands that are like in close proximity, i.e., in America? So that might be part of it. It had a lot of sort of lines with a lot of great bands in Australia, but just didn't quite make it over here because you've got to relocate. And that leads into my next question. Do you think in hindsight the band have regret that maybe they should have located themselves in LA where it's all happening and not try to conquer the world from Canada?
LA, no. I think there was, if you ask maybe Ray, there might be some regret in terms of they were offered a record contract in Europe, which required them to stay in Europe with Black Dragon Records. And this is actually there's documented proof of this because I think it's in the magazine interview or the magazine article. I have a magazine article from a French rock magazine, the magazine in my closet here. And it's, Black Dragon is mentioned, or it was in a newspaper article. I can't remember. I had several articles that I was drawing information from that they were also telling me. So as they were telling me things that were happening, I was showing on the screen actual articles from the time where they were talking about it in print. right? So it's like how much more proof can you get than that? Their recollection of it, and also it's in print. But there, I think there was some regret around that, but that would have required them to stay in Europe, and I think it was just too miserable of a time for them to stay longer than they did. Now, if you look at Twisted Sister's history, because there's a great documentary about Twisted Sister that came out on Netflix like 5 years ago or so. They went to Europe and they had a record contract over there when they couldn't go further here. They went over to Europe, put out a couple albums, played festivals, built up a name there. Then it hit over here bigger, you know. So that recipe or whatever worked for them, and it could have worked for Mystique. And maybe, looking back in hindsight, they could have played their cards differently a number of different ways. But I do know that there was a record contract on the table. Now, again, I don't know what the numbers were. It might not have just been we have to stay in Europe, and that's the one thing. There might have been numbers that were not in their favor either, or it would have required, other things to happen. And they, at that time, kind of starting to have families. I think Ray had a small kid at the time too. So I think that kind of played
Mm.
into it. Not so much about the LA thing. I haven't heard them really talk about, we should have went to LA. I think other people said that. But I
I
think
know Martin
they,
Popoff does mention that's probably one of the factors why they didn't quite make it.
yeah, and I really think they were really proud of where they were coming from. There was a really big music scene in Hamilton, Ontario, which is an hour away from the GTA, like the Toronto area. So it was, close by the Toronto area, and there was a pretty good music scene there. There's a lot of punk bands, local punk bands did really well there and stuff like this, and I think they really wanted to make it in their backyard more than having to leave and go somewhere else to try to make it. I
Yeah,
don't necessarily think how much they regret not going to LA. There was an American tour that was set up, which had to get canceled last minute because Les, the bassist, broke his arm on a motorcycle accident. And at the time, there was no internet, and it wasn't easy to just get a bass player to jump on board and go to the States. But they had they had an opportunity to support a band in the States, and there was a bunch of American dates lined up, and it unfortunately was canceled almost last minute. And I think that there's regrets about stuff like that, but then at the same time, it's like you can't control everything, right? So, no.
yeah. One of the interesting things about the band is the changing focus and the sound of the band, and you got to say that like your eyes are drawn on Ray. He's a good-looking lad, and some of those photos of him in the early days, he looks like a young David Lee Roth. So definitely from a marketing perspective, and I'm saying from a marketing perspective, I could see that he'd be the draw card. Like if the band went to LA, I think a lot of eyes would have been on him, and that would have made for an interesting story. So was that a lot of angst for the band to bring up that era when they go into the hair metal years? Because it seems like it is a bit of, it's quite jarring when you look at the early photos and hear the sound, and then you see this photo in 1988, and I think Martin Popoff, he does these wonderful little inserts in the show where he goes, "Oh, there's no genes to be seen. It's like clothes explode. Yes, this is 100% hair metal," and it really is. It's so time capsule to that period where people were just putting loud. Was there a lot of band angst at this changing that image and trying to keep up with what was prevalent at the time?
Well, I know that they had some management who were really pushing, they were all aware of the visual piece and selling music visually. Even in those early photos that you had mentioned, they, were wearing the leopard print or the black leather and, that kind of stuff. They really looked like a heavy metal band. And later, I don't think there was as much angst to try it. I do think that they were like anxious to make it and to do something big. And a lot of the bands, I mean, I think even in the film Martin mentions like, bands like Kiss, like look where they came from and how they ended up looking by the end of the 80s, right? A lot of bands, it was I don't want to say it was impossible, but I think a lot of bands, it was hard to avoid the visual aspect of the hard rock music industry at that point. I think more where there was points of contention was when the music changed. Because I think initially like that, that big color poster that you're talking about where they had, the hair and the black and white and they look like a hair metal band. They were still doing like kind of heavy progressive music. That was the stuff they recorded in France with Eric. It's still pretty heavy and
I am the
progressive.
king. I am the king. That's so unhair metal like. But they had this image that looks kind of Vinnie Vincent gone wild. It's there's a bit of a
Yeah.
conflict here, isn't there?
Yeah, visually, but I think they were kind of almost even not minding that aspect of it. I think they liked to put on a show. Like they had smoke bombs and they had like light shows and I think they enjoyed like providing a visual appeal to the audience who came to see them live. I think more when it started to become let's dumb our music down to fit in. I think that's where the angst came from, more than let's try to frill ourselves up a bit to look a certain part. I don't think they minded that at all. I think if you ask Ray, like that was part of it. That's part of the job and that's part of being, in the band. And like you had mentioned, that was a great reference to David Lee Roth, like when you listen to there's a few board tapes floating around that I've listened to in their entirety, and like he engages with the audience, and you know what I mean. He tries to talk with them and things like this, and he does a great job. He's a great front man. He's not just a great vocalist, but he's a great front man. And all the members did it, put effort. Like John, his mom was a hairstylist, and he worked on his hair and he worked on his look, and he could play the drums, and you know what I mean, things like this, and they really came together to try to make a visual show, like a concert. Like they were kind of doing stadium arena shows in like smaller venues and stuff like this in terms of their special effects and things like that, which was really cool. There's some footage in the film, but I think it was more the music changing where things started breaking down, because then whatever they were doing wasn't working even with the visual aspect. So then they tried to, like I said, change their musical direction, and that's where I think I mean, Mystique had been fractured a couple of points at that point, but I think the change in direction of music is what kind of was the ultimate fracture that led to the band disbanding,
Yeah, it's
more
all
than
about
more than the visual aspect.
yeah, it was all about the music. Did you detect there was regret with Ray, looking back and thinking about what could have been, or was he's sort of compartmentalized it and he's reconciled that was then, this is now? And for that matter, any of the band members, was there did you get a sense of regret of, we could have made it?
I don't. I think they could have made it. I think if Martin lays it out perfectly in the film. It's just sometimes if things don't line up perfectly,
Yeah,
it just And I do think that there's a lot of bands like Mystique who were talented enough and could write music and play well and play live. And a lot of
yeah,
bands that came from LA who were great, who never really made it. You know what I mean? Like Hawk, the band Hawk.
yeah,
There's live footage of them live. They kind of
yeah.
remind me of Mystique in a lot of ways. They didn't, nobody knows who
But
Hawk is now.
but did the band have any regret? You think? Did you get any sort of emotion from them? You sort of like real regret that we could have done it through
Not
this whole process?
necessarily. Like I think with, for John, I think in the end his thing was more like he just wanted the recognition for what he had done, more so than he regretted not making it. Because it's hard to say. I
Yep.
think a lot of people, maybe it's a defense mechanism. Like even me on my part, I kind of messed up a lot in my youth and wasn't where I wanted to be at certain ages of my life, and it took me longer to get my life on track than other folks. At the same time, it's like I don't regret that stuff because, I have a beautiful wife and a beautiful kid, and you know what I mean? And I'm really happy where I am right now. And I think there may be some pieces of them that might go, yeah, we could have, maybe if we pivoted here or there, things could have been differently. But a lot of stuff is out of your control. And I think it's more just like John said in the end, like just the fact that this film came out and it's getting recognized, like just the recognition means a lot to him now, more than I think, trying to recapture those days. Is there regret? Maybe, like I think Ray said, maybe if we signed with Black Dragon Records and put out a couple albums over there, it would have been different, right? Like there's those questions, but you can't even ask them. And I don't think any of them really linger on them. Like again, I'm the one that kind of brought a lot of this up, after that 30th anniversary thing came out. Before that, I was interested in the band, but I'm the one that was kind of asking these guys questions. It's not like people were trying to, it's not like the Mystique was banging on people's doors saying, hey, we're this old band and give us a chance and film a documentary about us or whatever. I'm the one that kind of approached a lot of them, and a lot of them had moved on, like Vic. became a pasture. And I'm sure he doesn't regret anything about where his music life took him because it took him into the, what he ended up doing. Ian got into computers, like they all ended up getting into different spaces,
Mm.
I think a lot of them appreciated and enjoyed the time that they had and the cool experiences that they had. But yeah, maybe there probably is some regret around, if we had went left instead of right, but a lot of that's out of your control.
Yeah. Was there anything that hit the cutting floor that was just too personal, and you thought, no, we can't put that in, or too controversial?
There's the part around near the end where Ray, John, Ian, Carl, Roman, they're all kind of talking about the final album that is being made and why it didn't get made and why the band broke up and stuff. It's in there and the story's in there. I think there's pieces of it that, out of respect to some folks, didn't make the final version of it, but you basically get the answer. There's maybe some more context that I know of,
Mm.
that John and Ray know of, that maybe wasn't the focus or the goal of the film to really put a spotlight on the negativity around certain things. And like Ray talks about leaving the band and kind of like apologizes to the other members about how he kind of just walked out, basically, right? There's more to that I left out because it was kind of like how much how much do you need to hear him apologize? You know what I mean? It was kind of like it was shortened a bit. So maybe in that sense there was, but there's nothing that's not revealed to the audience. You get the story and you should understand at the end. My goal was that you would understand at the end that the music wasn't working for the band. But in
Mm.
terms of like, was there anything that somebody said something and I went, whoa, I can't include that? No, not really. No, everybody was
Yeah.
pretty on the same track, on the same path. But I
Yeah.
was a little sensitive in the way that I edited that part for sure.
Yeah. Absolutely. Did you try to get the band together? Is that part of the narrative arc that you were planning, at the end of the movie, in some way, shape, or form? Maybe get them to perform, and it just did. You couldn't get them together in a performance sense, because at the end of the show ends at the premiere basically, and you get the three of them up on stage and they take a bow, which is wonderful. It's a wonderful finish to the film. Spoiler alert: I might take this out of the show, but we'll work it out.
No, don't.
But but um, but was part of? Were you tempted to sort of, maybe we could get them to do one song for the road?
So that was the goal with the 30th anniversary, but it didn't work out. I always envisioned them appearing together as a band at the premiere. The way that you see it in the film, that was my vision. I never asked them to perform together. Maybe I should have. Maybe I should have said, "Hey guys, why don't you get it together?" But I think like John was still involved in music at the time and still is actually. John's a workhorse. He's still working with bands and trying to get material out there because he loves music. Ray kind of quietly retired from music after his last band had disbanded, and he hadn't played since I think 2015 was the last time that he played live. And the film debuted in 2022 at the theater. I never asked them to, and it was never my vision. But as a fan, I would have loved to have seen it. But I knew that it was an uphill battle, and I don't think even asking them to do it would have changed their opinions on doing it. I kind of left it alone because I was already asking a lot of everybody because I didn't have any money. I didn't pay anybody anything for this, even the people that helped me put it together. And I learned a lot of, I almost put a lot of it together myself. And I learned a lot
Yeah,
about putting a film together myself, but I never asked anybody for a dollar. And
yeah,
I was already asking a lot. As a fan, oh my God, I would have loved to. I got excited when the 30th anniversary came out, and I thought it sounded like they were going to record a new song and play live, but it didn't work out for whatever reason.
yeah.
So that was
Maybe it's a bit of a cliche, isn't it? Because any typical, sort of story about a documentary, the band get back together at the end, So maybe you're going against the cliche. It's a different sort of approach.
Now, I wish the some of the other members could have been there. Now, at the end, you see the three of them, Ian, John, and Ray on stage. Vic couldn't make it, and Carl couldn't make it to the premiere. Unfortunately, we only did it one night, and some of the other band members just were not involved. Some of them sent their blessing. Eric sent his blessing and provided me a bunch of materials, but he declined
Mm,
to do an interview. Dave Dragos. gave his blessing, like his family, showed up to the premiere and supported the film and stuff like this. So, some of the guys were like, you know, promoters of it, but they didn't show up. So that my vision was having as many of them as I could on stage. If they would have played, that would have been an amazing bonus. At this point, I don't think it's ever going to happen. But at that time, even then, it was, I think, a stretch to ask.
Now, I'm going to have a few questions about you and the process of doing this film. Um, was it hard to get funding? Did you
I
have
didn't
to
get any
mortgage?
funding.
Did you mortgage
My,
your house? I mean,
no.
how did you pull this together, Marco?
Yeah, the
From
hardest part was the hardest part was
that,
convincing my wife to spend money when I had to spend money here and there. She was very supportive though in the end. No, I bought a camera off of Amazon for less. It was like a $1,700 back in like 2017, and it sat around in my closet for like a year before I even used it.
mm,
Um, but I needed to show that I was serious, and I bought a visually impressive looking camera. Now, was it the best camera I probably could have spent that money on? Probably not, but it was like a shoulder mount, and I had a tripod, and I had the lighting system. All of this
mm,
probably cost me about 2 grand, 2 grand Canadian at the time. That's all I spent on the film, other than gas and buying my buddies coffee when they came to like work, help me out. When they came to help me set up and film, I had a sound guy who I worked with, who is a friend of mine, is still a friend of mine. Nick from the Contrarians, he was the sound guy. He kind of helped set up some of the audio and edit some of the audio afterwards. And Aaron, who went to university for film and television, he was my cinematographer. I didn't pay these guys anything, but bought them coffees. That's the extent of my expenses. This film I created for way under 5 grand. 2 grand for the equipment and a little bit extra for gas and coffees. That's about it.
well, there you go, folks. That's a shoestring budget. So,
No, but it wasn't even a budget. Like it literally was just I put some stuff on my credit card and that was it.
yeah.
So it shows you like end time. Lots and lots and lots of time. Hours and hours and hours and hours of time that which can't be like I guess quantified or whatever in money terms. Like I can't tell you how much I spent hour wise in labor, but hours and hours and hours and hours of time. But other
Yeah.
than
Look,
that, yeah, it was just when you're passionate about something and you're motivated, you can do it. You just, you got to do it. You just got to move forward.
absolutely. And I've seen you on other shows, I think with Michael Adano, how you were talking about how there was so much footage that you had to edit it down into this movie. So the version I've had here is the 139 minutes. There's the video, and there, the one that's been released at the movies was like around 90 minutes. Was it really stressful with all this footage, compressing it into a sort of a narrative structure? Um, was your brain in a fog for a period of time trying to, piece it all together?
No, it's really weird. Like I knew the more pieces, like I knew the general story, I knew the discography, I knew the timeline, and the more I talked to people, the more I understood point A to point B. And I really, like, if you watch the movie, it's really point A to point B, to the point where maybe it's maybe it's too much point A to point B. Maybe I could have explored those personal relationships a little bit more, but I really was just trying to focus on like where did they come from, where did they end up? And it's really like, and it was all in my head. I can't write anything out. God love him. Aaron was like, write out the beats and write out this, write out that. I tried to do that for 2 seconds. I can't do it. It was just all in my head. And I sat down and I took all the footage and I asked the questions, like I had mentioned earlier in this interview. They were all long form interviews, but they were all the questions I asked. Now I would deviate if somebody said something and I thought, oh, that's interesting. Let me go on that. All the interviews I asked all followed the same timeline. And then the first cut was like 4.5 hours. There was no footage or photographs or anything like this. It was just interviews, just talking heads, and it was a 4.5 hour. And basically, I took that 4.5 hour thing, got the main best parts of everybody's whatever, and whittled that down to 2 hours and whatever the DVD was. That was stressful because there were pieces that I was like, oh, I don't want to cut this out, but you know what I mean? Like you kind of, you know, work, see your children, but you're kind of like cutting out pieces of your like, oh, I want to keep this in, but I gotta get it below this time because it was, especially for the hour and a half version, just getting it down to that short. I don't remember what the initial question was, but it was a lot of work and in a weird way, when everything went locked down in 2020, the um the film progress the film's progression accelerated exponentially. When everything locked down and I was at home, everything like just started happening really quick after that. Because I was
Yeah,
still shooting when we did the
yeah.
lockdowns. I had to cancel interviews because of the lockdowns.
Yeah, and the Contrarians was parallel to this as well, running a very big, well, sizable YouTube channel. So you had a lot of eggs in your basket, so to speak. Last question from me: what's the future for Marco? Are you going to do another documentary? Have you got some ideas bubbling in your head that maybe do another one?
I had some ideas that I kind of half-heartedly pursued, and it didn't really unfold. I had approached somebody about a documentary who was in the music business, but I really, on reflection, I kind of didn't want to do it because of the work involved. And I think it might have came through in my pitch. And the person was just like, oh, yeah, yeah, I'll let you know. And then they never got back to me, which is probably a good thing. Um, so I kind of half-heartedly pursued one or two things. I requested funding through the Canadian Council of Arts, but I also didn't know what I was doing either. Like I'm not a financial person. I had to like lay out like a budget, and I literally just put in numbers. So I didn't even know what I was doing, and of course it got declined because I don't know what I'm doing. It's like I don't need funding. This is what I was trying to tell you in my response to your last question there. It's like I don't need funding. So I do have ideas, and I would love to pursue these avenues, and I've been really, really, it's been on the edge of my mind a lot lately, and I would like to do something, and I hope I do. Uh, yeah, I hope this isn't the, if, you know what, even if I don't do anything else, like I'm really proud of this film. Everything that I envisioned came to fruition. Yeah. The passion I had for making this film, all the hours of work that I talked about didn't feel like work. There were some barriers, there were some letdowns, but at the end, I'm more proud of that than almost anything.
Well, I've never made a movie, and a lot of my friends have made a movie, and you have, and that's an achievement. And I think this is a real labour of love, and people can see that. So, congratulations. And I know some time has passed, and it's wonderful getting you on the show. And I think it's good that we've had this conversation after a lot of time has elapsed, so you can reflect and let the dust settle. Because you did quite a few interviews in the time, and there's a bit of a whirlwind. Marco, where can you tell the folks at home where you can get this movie? Is it on streaming? Where can they see this movie worldwide?
Yeah, so if you want to watch the film, the only way to watch it right now is physically. So you would have to message either the official Facebook page of Mystique. So
Hmm.
I think it's official Mystique 30th, and or the Instagram page, which is the Mystique Film at Mystique Film on Instagram. Just send a direct message. We had a website for a while, but then once things slowed down, we kind of just, cost money to keep things running, right? So just send us a message. Like we've been really cool about like, you want a DVD? Sure. This is how much it's going to cost. We'll ship it with tracking. And we'll throw in a Mystique button or something. You know what I mean? Like we'll throw in something extra there for anybody who reaches out. It was really cool. We sold quite a few DVDs actually. We only printed 250 of them, so it's very, very, very limited. And we have stock left, but it's very limited, and 250 copies. They were stamped on a production line in a factory. These are legit. They're not burned, and they're factory sealed. So you'll get a factory sealed production line stamped DVD if you want the DVD version. It was available for streaming when we were in the Liftoff Toronto Film Festival. For a month, you could stream it if you purchased the ticket to the film festival. And that would be something I think we should probably pursue, is maybe putting up the 90-minute version somewhere for people who just don't have DVD players or care about physical stuff. So that would be probably maybe the next thing maybe I should reach out to the guys and talk about. So keep an eye out.
Watch this space, and I'm happy to share that. So just watch the links, And folks, if you're interested, and it's definitely worth seeing, click on the link and take it from there. Marco, wonderful to see you again. Get you on the Rock Daydream Nation interview and talking some memories about Mystique standing on the firing line. Put it up again, folks. Do yourself a favor and check it out. And please like and subscribe to Rock Daydream Nation. Look, maybe you saw Mystique. There are fans everywhere. Tell us what you think of the movie, your memories of this band. We love reading your feedback. Marco, yet again, wonderful to have you on the show, and we'll catch up soon. Cheers. All the
Thank
best.
you. I'm honored.
See ya.
I'm honored.
Bye. See ya.